Okay, y'all. So, I don't know if you can hear the air. It's kind of loud, but it's hot outside. It's 86 degrees. The other day it was 104. Maybe it was just my car being hot, but I don't have the time. So, right now I'm on the job. My wig is pushed back, and I don't feel like fixing it right now. So, I have on a hat and busted wig. It is what it is, but we're going to move forward. I had a specific topic that I was coming on here to speak about that the Lord told me to talk about, but it just so happens that sometimes when you are given something to do, something else comes up. So I also have to address this too, because it kind of falls into the same lane as what I'm getting ready to talk to you about that he told me to talk to you about. It's kind of the offspring of that. In previous videos, I spoke about perversion, and this subcategory that I'm going to be talking about first is going to be talking about guardians and children in regards to them getting caught up in perversion and getting caught up in mischief. So, the children are our future, right? Just bear with me. My wig pushed back and I'm not gonna fix it right now. I turned the AC down a little bit. All right, so the first part of this subcategory, or the first point of this subcategory, is stop putting your children in each other's things. Give them their individuality. And I say that because there's different ways that you can look at this, and there's different angles that you can come at this. One of them is this: as they get older, they don't have to always lean on somebody for them to understand their own identity. If you give them their own individuality, give them their own space, then they can learn who they are at an early age, instead of having one child that's dominant and them always ruling and leading over something. Both children, or however many children you have, can have their own individuality. Then when they have that, at least when they have a start at that, you can put them together. Meaning, you don't always have to have them separate, and you don't always have to have them together, but have a balance. That way they know themselves from a young age. And then when they come together, they have to learn how to cooperate together. I find that in my adulthood, as I'm working with a lot of people and I'm in a lot of different establishments that I'm working in, two things are happening here. One, they're getting on my nerves, okay? And two, they're leaning on my dominance. Now, somebody might say, oh, well, that's just because God called you to be a leader and da-da-da. No. When I was coming up, I was so at peace before I started getting into mischief myself, and before I started dealing with other people's envy and jealousy and other people's demons. Before I fell into my own demons, I was at peace with myself, and I had a relationship with God at a very young age. Very young age. I remember being in kindergarten, and I used to go to Norwood Elementary in Miami, Florida. Me and my older sibling, my older sister, we used to walk to school. I remember being in kindergarten, and I hadn't had any major traumatic events happen in my life yet. So I can remember the peace that I had as a child. I can remember just la 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 la, just taking in the environment, taking in different people. I remember having my first kiss in kindergarten. I remember his name. I'm not gonna say his name, but I remember he used to always mispronounce the word yellow, and he used to always say Lelo. I remember. Okay, I'm not gonna front. I knew what I was in kindergarten. I was a flirt in kindergarten. I remember that same boy. See, this is what I'm talking about. My individuality. I had my own thing going on. Okay. I remember my mom used to dress me in these cute uniform skirts. And I remember we was sitting at a table. This is kindergarten. We was sitting at a table, and I got up on the table. Not on the table. I got up on the chair, like my knees was on the chair, my hands was resting on the table, and I had my little skirt. And I remember I was just tooting my little booty up, right? And he he read what I was doing and tapped me on the booty. This is the same boy that gave me my 1st kiss in kindergarten. We was sitting on the carpet, and we was waiting for story time. Okay, so I had my own peace about myself. I was taking in my environment, and I knew I liked me some boys. One particular boy. I also remember my first encounter with girls not liking me. It was one dominant female in the group. I hadn't had any heartbreak yet. I was in kindergarten. I hadn't had any heartbreak yet. I hadn't had any serious trauma or anything like that. And I just remember, out of nowhere, unknowingly to me, I didn't know what her issue was. She wasn't dominant to me, but I picked her out as the leader, even as a kindergartner. And she walked with like 3 or 4 little girls. And she said out loud, "We not gonna be her friend no more." And I looked at her and I didn't care. That is my personality. My personality is I like to flirt. Whoever I like them hard. I like to flirt. I'm at peace and I have a relationship with God. I've always been that since a little girl. Before any serious trauma happened in my life. That was before any serious whooping or beat down I got, any serious trouble I got in, any serious reprimand or discipline that I got. I literally was daddy's little girl, and I had a relationship with Christ because I always remember him putting the word before me, putting the Bible before me and saying, "Look, you got to read this, you got to read this." As a child, and him kneeling down and praying with me as a child. Those are my core memories as a child. Now, that was me having my individuality established. I'm a middle child. I have an older sister. So as I got older, I started looking up to her because, of course, she's telling me what to do. So she was the dominant female that was in my life. And then above her was my mother. So whenever it came down to, ooh, I want to have fun, I'm going to her. She's the one who introduced me to music. She's the one who used to tell me, here, sing this, do this, right? She's the one who introduced me to that industry. She used to watch music videos. I was watching music videos. She used to dance. I was dancing. The only difference that we had is I was more tomboyish because we have different fathers. And my father is in my life. So for me, I feel like I was kept as a little child more so than she was. In regards to that, I was always outside, but I was always doing like tomboyish things because my father was a football coach. He played all type of sports, played basketball, he played golf, he played baseball. He was always coaching football. He was always watching film, watching tapes of the games and of his players. We were always watching professional football, professional basketball, professional baseball, professional golf. He had mitts in his closet. He had like a little man cave. We called it the back room. I was playing with baseball mitts. He had basketballs around the house in the garage. I was playing with basketballs. I was playing with baseball bats. I was playing with footballs. He was teaching me little stuff like how to hit a baseball. So I was always learning different things that had to deal with a little bit of roughness, whereas she was, like I said, we have different fathers, so she was mainly around my mother and around her friends. So like I said, going back to that moment as a kindergartner, I was at peace. Every part of my life as a child at that point was at peace. So her saying out loud so I can hear it in her little group, "We're not gonna be her friend no more," I didn't care. I didn't end up talking to this girl again until middle school because I ended up leaving Norwood Elementary. And I remember my teacher. Her name was Miss K-Back. That was my kindergarten teacher. And she was a big, husky white lady. And every time she did story time and every time she talked, she used to have these little white pieces that used to, like little white spit. They used to go from the bottom lip to the top lip. That's gross and disgusting. But that is like a landmark memory of who this lady is to me. And so she was my kindergarten teacher and my first grade teacher. I ended up leaving Norwood Elementary School after first grade, and I went to a school on the beach, on South Beach, called South Point Elementary. And that is what started to shape me as far as opening my mind and helping my individuality even more. My mom was big on us learning Spanish because she worked for the government, and at that time, Cuba and Cubans and Little Havana and, just Hialeah, and oh my God, the Hispanics were ruling the world at that time. I'm not trying to be funny, but if you grew up back in the time when, what that boy name was? Y'all remember when Elian Gonzalez? It was this big old thing with Elian Gonzalez. That was a big thing. That was a big time for Floridians because they were still really heavy on, what that man name was? On the dictatorship of the Cuban president. I can't think of his name right now. But they kept coming over on the boat. They was coming over on the boat heavy. Everybody kept coming over to touch U.S. soil back then real heavy. Back then was a lot. There were a lot of big, heavy things happening back then. Like, I was still in school when 9/11 happened. I was still in school when Aaliyah died. Like, it was just a lot of huge things that were taking place around that time. But not to get off topic, I'm just trying to get you to understand, like, why it was such a heavy thing for us to move around and not to just stay in one, community for our entire growth, for our entire childhood, going into puberty and then eventually getting into adulthood. So I'm saying all that to say, don't put your children together in everything all the time. They need to be able to fend for themselves. Because when I was in elementary school, even though me and my sister went to elementary school together, we had our own separate lives. Because she's like 3 or 4 years older than me. We had our own separate lives, and I had my own friends. I had my own friends, and she was my sister. That's how that went. Any conflicts I had in school, she never had to come and say anything or do anything, because I was always chilling. That was just me. That was just my personality. I wasn't a drama-filled person. I was always saying slick stuff, though. I do remember being a child and always having a mouth. And eventually, as I got older, I started getting disciplined for my mouth, and then I became super quiet. And what I realized is when I was younger, I told the unfiltered truth a lot, as a lot of children do. But this is why I say you should put them in individual activities as well. Balance it out because they learn who they are.